The Superman movie is progressive. How? What was once seen as conservative, humanist, small-town values are now playing out on the big screen. It's about making sure your fellow man isn't stepped on. It's about making sure you aren't stepped on. It's all about loving humanity, life, and all of our complicated messiness. The progressive movement, often disparaged in American politics, is usually the one responsible for impactful policy within the American political system. And just as how what was once considered center-liberal is now considered radical leftism, Superman, a classic American hero, is now labeled radical and woke. He used to be considered the uncool one, the Boy Scout, the conservative. Batman was always the edgy one. Superman was the goody two-shoes. Now he's a radical. What happened? Welcome to America in 2025, where everything once considered normal and American is now dangerous and radical. We have moved very far right, but hopefully not for long. Superman indicates a shift in consciousness. The movie is not just a reboot for DC, but an indication of a cultural reboot happening in the US. It's not something radical or woke. It is a rebirth of America's most fundamental idealistic impulses. The progressive movement and the philosophy of Superman are retrofuturist movements. They have the capacity to reshape America's story in a more authentic fashion. This means trying to have the world that our grandparents had in America. Lives that are balanced economically and prioritize basic moral decency on a societal level. Both Superman and the progressive movement are kind of corny, lame, and completely wholesome. But after the horror of World War II, we saw the rise of the hokey, campy, and silly era of the 1950s. And just like after World War II, the darkness of the last decade has the capacity to give birth to another era of decency and optimism, an era of can-do attitudes toward difficult problems, one that prioritizes goodness, authenticity, and joy. So, in this video, we're going to talk about Superman's themes, the philosophy of the progressive movement, and a little bit of history. Ultimately, the success of this film shows us a pathway to the future. When I see the movie Superman, I see so many progressive leaders and voters. I see a system stacked up for wealthy and older people, ones who are desperate to hold on to their power at the cost of humanity itself. I see young people and a better world that is real because it was real before this time. And for the first time in years, I finally see a reason to get out of bed in the morning. So today, I want to make the striking parallel between these two entities clear and ground their existences in history. I want to expand the hope of the symbol of the Man of Steel into the real world. I want to highlight a path to the future that isn't a dystopian mess, but a rebirth of America as a shining beacon of hope. I know it all sounds corny, but we all believe in this, whether we realize it or not. By the end of this video, you will see how. If you like this Superman, then you too are a progressive. But first, before we get to any of that, we need some context. So we're going to talk about comic book superheroes. Also, if you haven't seen the movie, pause here and read the summary I've attached in the description below. But if you know what happens, then let's proceed. The film takes the superhero back to his comic book roots. The splashy, intense visuals feel like reading a comic book come to life. Aesthetically, that's interesting because it revitalizes the style of superhero movies, which has become kind of stagnant. But it also makes the character more authentic. The message of the Silver Age comics is that basic morality, naivete, and being corny and trusting are good things. Does anyone else remember the Crimson Chin, the Fairly Odd Parents knockoff superhero played by Jay Leno in early Y2K? The story of that episode basically goes that when Timmy, a child with fairy godparents, wishes himself into a comic book, he decides to tell the Crimson Chin that he's just a comic book character. And of course, the hero has an existential breakdown. Timmy then reminds him that he might not be real, but the Chin is real to the people in his world. Being sincere, earnest, trusting, these are all the old qualities of classic superheroes. So much so that we've spent the last few decades mocking them for it. But our patently skeptical and ironic world has created such horror. Without values of goodness to believe in, our leaders and other powerful people have no standards to be held to. Comic books have always pulled from reality, and they've been getting grittier and more realistic as a result. It's not shocking when our heroes were kicking the crap out of Hitler, or when they were boogieing along with villains in the 60s Batman, or in Young Justice, the cartoon series, when Lex Luthor used a conflict between two Korea-type countries to forward his agenda, or in the Justice League and Batman Beyond, when the stories revolved around Eastern Europe and villains from that region in the aftermath of the conflict in the Balkans. Americans, superheroes pull from present politics because those conflicts are the ones we wish we could see real action on. We wish our favorite superheroes could step in and either work with or ignore international law and save people from dying when our institutions fail, when our governments can't work it out, when international business has too much money invested to allow diplomacy to work, when children are hurt or dying and no one cares. It's wish fulfillment, pure and simple. I know many people are jaded with comic book movies thanks to Marvel's money-making machine, but before they became that, comics and their characters were niche interests, but important because they encompassed the core values of modern America. They are our version of the Greek myths. America doesn't have many historical myths, but Marvel and DC have created a canon of characters much like the Greek pantheon. They have always determined who we are as a culture. Each version of the various characters and stories were different depending on the time they were released in. From the comic books to TV and movies, reboots of each comic book character express a political stance of the time. Whether it was the goofiness of the 50s and 60s to the serious stylized nature of the 90s or the emotional post-9/11 era to the dark and scary interpretations of the 2010s. Now, I am not a big comic book fan. I grew up on the movies and TV cartoons, please don't judge me. But with the advent of Marvel's universe, these distinctly American heroes and myths are now recognized the world over. So this is an important conversation to have, even if I'm probably not the best person to have it. These pantheon figures determine the stories of our culture, our history, that we share as Americans. Superman was created by two Jewish artists, Schuster and Siegel, as a kind of Gollum figure. They faced anti-Semitism in America, and this was their response. But to me, Superman represents who we are as Americans. All of us come from different parts of the world, but have the capacity to be whoever we want to be here. The same way that Earth's sun gives him powers, America gives us all the capacity to break beyond our communities as immigrants and conceptualize ourselves differently. At least in theory. No minority group in America hasn't taken its lumps and been held back, but there's always room to fight for who we want to be. This is actually how we ended up with birthright citizenship. If you want to learn a little more about that, I've linked the Letters from an American article that kind of discusses that. Superman is a character that needs no introduction. As David Cornsweet himself said in an interview with GQ, he didn't remember his introduction to Superman because the character is so iconic. My first introduction to the character would have come from Batman, the animated series, which was on at the same time as Superman, the animated series, and of course, the world's finest crossover. I really didn't like Superman. With the whole saving cats from trees and the photo ops and the clean-cut hair with the little curl in the front, he was just so corny. It grated on me so much. He was so wholesome and farm-fed that in World's Finest, when Bruce tries to hit on Lois, I was all for it because Superman was just so basic and Lois was a total badass. Yet here we are in 2025. I'm watching his movie and I see myself and others like me in him and his actions. Superman has always been truth, justice, and the American way. From the Silver Age comics to the Justice League animated series that I grew up watching, he was less insufferable in that than he was in the animated series. But if you dislike lame, corny, campy nonsense, then you don't like Superman, and that's okay. But in modern times, we need him more than I ever realized. We need leaders and heroes, people who are clean and moral, who work hard to help others no matter what, whose moral fiber inspires us to embrace the best parts of our humanity, who are willing to take on self-sacrifice for what is right, and are naive and trusting with wisdom beneath the hokey facade. I grew up with Superman, and like most people, to me he was a model of a good man, even though I was annoyed by his lack of coolness. But let's switch gears for a second while I give you context of the second topic of conversation today, the progressive movement in the Democratic Party. If you haven't been following the progressive movement in politics directly from the horse's mouth, that is to say, the social media channels of prominent progressive figures, then you likely have no clue what the movement is actually about. Mainstream news doesn't like to cover it, so I'll make an analogy. Much like Lex's powerful opposition to Superman, the opposition to the progressive movement is just as reality-bending to the point where the core tenets of the progressive movement are lost on the audience of certain news platforms. But if Superman found his way through, the movement will prevail too. For our purposes, things with this movement really began to take off with Bernie Sanders and his run for president back in 2016. It was a powerful feeling that the system was so deeply rigged against ordinary individuals. And while Obama had promised the public so many things, things he had failed to deliver, partially because of the stagnation in government at the time, and partially because he was obedient first to his corporate overlords. Bernie had been concerned about the rising power of business, the cutting of taxes for the wealthy, the overreach of the US war machine under the guise of protecting democracy, and the squeeze on working people for decades. His message resonated with young people, even those who couldn't vote, and people rose up around the country to vote for him, phone bank for him, protest the DNC for him. But as a man of honor, a missing concept in America today, he deferred to Hillary to prevent the party from breaking up. There are a number of reasons third parties don't work in America, but we're not going to get into that today. The point being that this movement struck a chord, and in abandoning Bernie's followers, the Democratic Party lost the 2016 election. Fast forward to 2018. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she is more commonly known, gets elected in the Bronx, she quickly sets out as the youngest congresswoman to change the game. Using social media and no-nonsense rhetoric, she expands the progressive wing of the party, along with help from things like the Sunrise Movement. I know that during the pandemic, I watched many of her live videos and interviews, learning about how the political system works behind the scenes. She highlighted the corruption baked into the system that she was doing her best to work against, and her message to us all after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died was to vote for Biden so that we could have a party in power that we could protest, one that would listen. And that message resonated deeply with the younger public. In Biden's regimes, he seemed to make a lot of important legislation that was much more progressive in nature, investing in infrastructure, pushing regulations, and a lot of important legislation that has since been repealed. But the movement took a hit with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Despite multiple progressive candidates having been elected to office, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, etc., they were primaried out by candidates who were backed by AIPAC, as well as powerful business interests who were looking for an opening. It was a hornet's nest of an issue, but to be a progressive, to be a liberal, means taking a side, even if people don't agree. It's something Superman does too, both in this film and in his history. In a political place, I think of the ACLU, a prominent civil rights organization that has always taken a side. Though the public didn't always agree with them, history usually has. Taking a stance isn't always a popular thing to do, but being an authentic person or movement means taking one anyway. Finally, we come to this year. MAGA has won everything. But the breakdown of the liberal democracy in America has galvanized the progressive movement. Enter Zohran Mamdani, a democratic socialist who was polling at 1% at the beginning of this year, but went on and swept the primary with vigor and passion, bringing an optimistic, corny, and charismatic energy to the race. Watching through his TikToks, it's easy to tell that he's going the distance. But, unlike Obama, who he's often been compared to because of his charisma, his policies are not talking head points. They are real, grounded facts based on the history of society and courage in his convictions. With his win, this is the moment of the Progressive Party being galvanized to action, to build something new that started 10 years ago and stalled multiple times through horrifying global events. Mamdani and other progressives' policies are often labeled with a variety of left-wing slurs, but the fact is, they are not radical at all. As you'll see from this article from New York Magazine, all the apocalyptic end of New York rhetoric is overblown, says the candidate. It's a platform that is not just urgent, but it's feasible and grounded in precedent, Mamdani told me on the day he clinched the nomination. In fact, nearly all of his cost of living proposals have been enacted or attempted in some form in New York or elsewhere in the country. Freezing the rent on the city's stabilized units, Mayor Bill de Blasio did it 3 times in 2015, 2016, and 2020. Raising the minimum wage, this year, following a decade of increases approved in Albany, the city's minimum wage hit $16.50. Mamdani's call for free public buses sounds an awful lot like the MTA's Fair Fares program, which currently lets low-income New Yorkers ride for half price. And an estimated 3 million hungry New Yorkers get 1.6 million government-supplied meals every day through federal SNAP benefits. So opening 5 government-owned grocery stores, one in each borough, is more like a tiny demonstration project than a Soviet-style takeover. If Mamdani's threat to tax wealthy New Yorkers sounds familiar, it's because bills to do exactly that have repeatedly been introduced in Albany for at least a decade. All died in committee. It's also worth noting that in 2021, then candidate for mayor Adams called for a special tax on ultra-wealthy New Yorkers. If you make more than $5 million a year, we're asking you to pay a little more to stabilize our city, he said at the time, a suggestion he promptly dropped after taking office. In truth, this chart that I found on Reddit is a more accurate representation of politics in America. I've linked it below if you want to study it more, but it speaks to how far right America has shifted and how the public doesn't realize it. In my opinion, and it's not just my opinion, I've read it in other places as well, most modern progressive policies harken back to the age of President Roosevelt and the New Deal. They encompass a social safety net and a sense of community as their basis for a society. There is a desire to help others and build a more balanced world that allows a liberal democracy to exist, in the same way that this Superman harkens back to the Silver Age of comic books. In fact, the platform of the 1944 DNC, which was firmly Roosevelt's party, goes further than any social safety net we have these days. It highlights the actions that the Democratic Party took to alleviate not only the suffering of the Great Depression, but to set up the bones of various social programs down the line. A lot of these programs focused on working people and farmers, but also supporting social justice and voting rights, similar to modern progressive or democratic socialist policies and ideas. The government did so much back then, and there was significantly less wealth in the world at the time. Extending trade policies, assuring equal pay for equal work, federal legislation to make the coal industry fair, social security such as pensions, unemployment insurance, help for the disabled, federal bank deposit insurance, benefits for ex-servicemen and women, and there's more. This is only the 1944 platform, which focuses on wartime issues. This doesn't even cover the economic end of it, like adapting tax laws to an expanding peacetime economy, encouraging new enterprise, and discouraging monopolies. If we went this far in modern times, Republicans would be up in arms. Imagine the federal government investing in modernizing America's energy infrastructure, reforming banking, expanding veterans benefits, having trade policies with other countries, not tariffs. We did some of those things when Biden was president, but all anybody could talk about was his age, not his investment in clean energy or infrastructure, or his attempts at regulating tech, or his deals with other countries. Now just proposing a grocery store is considered madness. Imagine when the government ran soup kitchens. In modern times, decency has become old-fashioned. Much like Superman, the progressive movement is one that loves humanity, and therefore values taking care of people. I'm not sure when exactly offering those who need help a hand became an evil endeavor, but it is exhausting to any moral sensibility. People aren't pawns to be manipulated into working as indentured servants for some morally bankrupt corporation. There is no interest in working with billionaires, corporations, or old men with money. The progressive movement, like Superman, understands the complexity and beauty of humanity as a process. It's never going to be a perfect world, but that doesn't mean that we should stop trying. Superman will never stop being super, and there is nowhere else for him to go. His family, his friends, and the love of his life all live on Earth. Young people, the bulk of the supporters of the progressive movement, are here for a while as well. They need to live, work, raise children, support elderly family members, and watch a warming world change drastically in their lifetimes. Pessimism just isn't an option. Only optimism can exist. I think of how Superman acted in Bravia. Not a great way to respect international law, but his actions did prevent a war. He took a stand. Whether it was the right one or not is a question for conversation, but it makes me think of how many progressive candidates were booted from Congress for supporting the Palestinian cause. They called it a genocide and demanded a ceasefire, but it's interesting how, in modern times, even being anti-war is now a controversial stance. Of course, this is the danger of taking a stand and having convictions in any situation. It is commonplace now to be a coward, to just go with the flow even in the face of horror, to be bland in one's opinions and duplicitous as a result. Politicians and leaders will hide their true opinions, being as inauthentic as necessary to get into positions of power, and then people are surprised when nothing changes. Yes, it is dangerous to take a stand in modern times, but it is also dangerous not to. While being authentic may be dangerous, it is part of being human. Humans grow and learn and change with time. We make mistakes. To be a leader is to own them and to try to keep improving. I think of Superman surrendering himself to Lex's soldiers after the video of his parents comes out. Even with all of that happening, all he can think of is helping crypto. That kind of morality is just dead these days. And yet, in the beginning of the film, during his interview with Lois, he comes off dismissive, childish, and petty about the consequences of his actions. Perhaps he's frustrated with always being questioned and berated on the internet when he's just trying to help people. Maybe it's jarring to hear those questions from one's romantic interest. I don't know. But what I love about the film is that we get to see his process of growth, of him taking accountability for the fact that he is a human with power. He's not perfect, and rather than trying to sweep his actions under the rug in his interview, by the end, he owns them. The key to modern life, maturity, and especially governance nowadays is process. You have to be okay with being in process, not being perfect and making mistakes. Both the world and the people in it are in constant process. I think of Zoran's recent TikTok, where he talks about how his comms team told him he uses the word ultimately too much. And after seeing a supercut of himself using that word, he tried to stop himself from saying it in an interview. He didn't quite succeed, but it was his way of letting us know that he was trying and growing and listening. The same way that Superman discusses his own humanity at the end. The key is to recognize process. That is where you've always been wrong about me, Lex. I am as human as anyone. I love, I get scared, I wake up every morning and despite not knowing what to do, I put one foot in front of the other, and I try to make the best choices that I can. I screw up all the time, but that is being human, and that is my greatest strength. And someday, I hope, for the sake of the world, you understand that it's yours too. Growth and change are a part of being human, and being mature and wise means embracing those changes intentionally. We have to have strong values within ourselves to be able to roll with the processes of being alive. Thankfully, Clark's adoptive parents give him just that. The same way that the progressive movement has a strong, working-class, focused platform rooted in historical precedent. Both entities here are trying to do things differently. There is an expectation of our behavior, and Republicans are the guiltiest of this attitude. They accuse everyone and everything of being woke. So much so that I'm not even sure what they mean anymore. And I remember when the word was only on Tumblr as a niche term. They see life as one thing and people as animals. Humans are awful, miserable creatures who are selfish and greedy, and we can be nothing more. If wokeness, in its original definition, claims that systems of race, class, gender, and other differences are biased towards one group over another, thus creating a completely stagnant, oppressive society, then their beliefs that humanity is nothing more than selfish, lazy, problematic animals and will only behave as animals are pretty much the same. If you are woke in the original social justice sense, then upon seeing those injustices, you should work to change them, something that is American to its absolute core. Our country is built on a foundation of justice, truth, and an ever-evolving system geared towards being liberal. This is the first time in America's recent history that both the culture and policy are moving towards hurting people so brazenly. Because MAGA people don't believe in humanity as a worthy endeavor. Also, just really quick, if you are interested in learning more about MAGA values, I'm working on a Yellowstone video, an article, maybe a series of videos that will illuminate the topic. So if you're interested in that, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments. Anyways, back to Superman. As I said, MAGA people don't seem to believe that humanity is a worthy endeavor. It's just a fact that we must constantly be striving to prove ourselves. We aren't enough just as we are. And while a certain level of striving to be a better person is healthy, most of it is unattainable. And because we can never measure up, it's easier to just believe tired old stereotypes, old ways of being and thinking and doing, and to just accept them as the norms. So, people are selfish and incapable of goodness. Everyone is evil, and immigrants are the greatest danger. They don't like that Superman is an immigrant, but he always has been. He crashed into Earth in a spaceship. Their backlash is more indicative of the mirror that his origin story holds up to them. And given Superman's origins as an immigrant since his inception, it makes them the villains. The same way that most of the progressive movement's candidates are immigrant, or black, or something else which is somehow unacceptable to the standards MAGA has created. It's easy to assume that a Muslim candidate or that Superman are evil because they are immigrants. It's easy to buy into that tribal, simplistic mentality. The reality is that America offers a blank slate for immigrants to be Americans. The real challenge is finding balance between one's roots and one's American citizenship, something Superman deals with throughout the movie, the same way that real-life immigrants do too. It is a complex and high-minded problem. Seeing people's backgrounds as a way to discredit them, discredit their ideas and their actions, is a kind of prejudice that is unquantifiable even in the modern age of quote-unquote wokeness. To assume that Superman is evil because his parents told him to be, rather than looking at his actions, how he saves people or how he stopped a war, is kind of cruel. In the same way, to assume that progressive candidates who grew up upper or middle class aren't fit to fight for everyone else is also foolish. We may be living in the wreckage of the falling apart Western liberal rational world, but I think there is enough logic left to see that a person's actions should determine who they are rather than their backgrounds. Or, as another Superman movie, The Iron Giant, famously stated,
"You are who you choose to be."
It makes no sense to see Trump, a man who not only grew up completely privileged, but has no interest in fighting for the working class, whose actions work against ordinary people, as some kind of savior of America. His actions do not align with his words. To be liberal, truly, is to embrace one's higher nature, the same way that Superman, even in the face of all of the atrocities leveled against him, never once hurts Lex. There are so many places where he would be justified in killing him or becoming nasty, but he really tries to stay as clean as he can. In the way that he saves people, in his words, his persona, he tries to remain as docile as possible, not just because it would give the world a free excuse to kill him, but because he knows he is a symbol of goodness and he must protect that idea at all costs. I think of how the progressive movement is consistently derided for supporting the Palestinian cause, even though they also support Jewish communities. People are quick to claim that the rising star of the movement, Zoran, will be anti-Semitic just because he believes that genocide is wrong, even though he worked with Brad Lander, and they both, Jewish and Muslim, cross-endorsed each other in the mayoral primary, and even though he has promised not to just give lip service to supporting Jewish communities, but also raising the budget for anti-hate crime legislation. Or as he said in a recent Colbert interview,
we're seeing a crisis of anti-Semitism. And that's why at the heart of my proposal for Department of Community Safety is a commitment to increase funding for anti-hate crime programming by 800%. Anti-Semitism is not simply something that we should talk about, it's something that we have to tackle. We have to make clear there's no room for it in this city, in this country, in this world.
And no justification for violence of any kind?
No, there's no room for violence in this city, in this country, in this world.
There is such a desire to not fall into old expectations of behavior. Because as an immigrant, Superman has a chance to rewrite his past. Many young immigrants in America will talk about the struggle of this. James Gunn perhaps unknowingly captured this internal struggle by changing Superman's origin stories a bit. For people who have been here for a while, they tend to forget that challenge. The fact that as an immigrant you must adhere to your roots, but your roots are often un-American. And if you grow up here, you prefer this place to your homeland, even if your parents and your family try to instill the values of their culture in you. To be a modern immigrant in America, you must negotiate the past and the present and shoulder your family's history in a different way. You can't be completely like them, and you don't want to be. The same way that Superman's parents tell him to conquer Earth. But the truth is, he wouldn't have wanted to, even if he had seen that message earlier, because he's always liked Earth. He likes his adopted parents and his job and his life as a protector. As an immigrant, he carries that same amalgamation of historic values, modern American values, and personal choices into his life as most immigrants do. And that's what makes immigrant life in America beautiful. Here you can be all of those complex things at once. The sort of blank slate of this country opens room for new ways of being in your own family and in your life. You have more choices than your relatives. You don't just have to be a carbon copy of your ancestors. You are indoctrinated with American values, and you become a multifaceted person like Superman. Superman can look at his roots and decide he doesn't want to be a conqueror, but he can still wear the crest of his family and be okay with his alien roots. The same way that Zoran and AOC are Americans first, but still respect their multicultural immigrant roots. They try to find a balance between both things while remaining grounded in love for their city. However, their personal familial struggles aren't things they discuss much because, much like Superman, the minute immigrants make a different part of themselves more visible, people tend to dogpile them. But they aren't just their roots. They are complex and unique people trying to break the mold of what is expected of them by Republicans who think that globalization hasn't accelerated in the last few decades. It is the gift of personal agency to everyone that in a time where people are evil because they believe that is the only way to be, Superman is a model, showing us how we can be good no matter who or what tells us not to be. Since his inception, Superman has always been that role model. Being human is his greatest strength, and by acknowledging that, he shows us that it is ours too. Humanity is a superpower that is unquantifiable. It gives us the ability to try and fail and keep improving. We can mess up and try again and do better. We can learn and grow and be different in the future. When Lois claims that it could never work out between them, she says it's because they are so different. She's a punk kid and he's the last son of a dead alien race. But we all know that they make it. It's their agency, the power they have to make a choice to be together no matter what. We get to choose our lives and our values, like love, which drive our choices, not our animalistic natures. We can be more than what the world expects us to be, and Superman shows us how that is possible. Superman tries to break the molds of behavior, the same way that many young progressives do. The party seeks not to take money from lobbyists and problematic organizations. They try to be responsive to the needs of the people, to care about the future as a different place than the past. I really would love to be able to talk more about progressive policies and platforms, things that AOC has done in her district, policies that Zoran has proposed, but it would be kind of boring, and this video is already very long. If you really don't know and want to know more, please check out his TikTok channel and some of her videos, which I've linked below, and you can see that their platforms and policies of a social safety net are very realistic. But back to Superman. I've met other men like him, who try to be gentle as men in a world that expects them to be violent and aggressive. Men, especially a lot of young men that I have met in my life, try not to be that way because it works against their value systems. Even when it's warranted, men will often avoid being emotional publicly for fear of being labeled illegitimate in some way. But men nowadays are trying to be more emotional privately, and it's wonderful, because talking, crying, expressing emotions healthily is so important. Superman, the most powerful man in the world, does this so well. He seeks comfort in the arms of his family, his partner. Every time he's injured or struggling, he heals by watching his Kryptonian parents speaking to him, and when he's unable to go to the Fortress of Solitude, he goes back to the family farm and heals there with his adoptive parents. In the end, he watches his home movies of them to relax, and the first thing he does after the first battle is over is find Lois. Even more telling is the moment when the truth of Superman's parents' message about his mission on Earth comes out. The first thing he does is go to Lois, seeking comfort from her. He seeks validation and deep conversation rather than trying to publicly spin the truth or defend himself. He simply accepts how others feel about him because it doesn't change who he is. He only cares to defend himself to the person he loves. In that moment, he's just another young man who is in touch with his feelings and going through struggles just like all of us. And that authenticity shines to young people who see how the curated world of social media is manipulated by trolls, bots, rich people, and other bad actors. In the end, the public face, as important as it is, isn't nearly as important as one's internal life. Even if Superman is forced to stop saving people, that love will endure, and so he prioritizes his goodbye to Lois. The cruelty of Luthor is not logical or scientific. It's sadistic, and a little too close to reality. It is based on the animalistic impulses in all of us. His pocket universe, where he traps Superman and anyone else he claims is a dissident, feels a little too close to the new camp in Florida, and the fact that he respects no laws there, international or national, is very similar to this presidential administration's behaviors. Superman has no rights as an alien, and that's just disturbing because oftentimes immigrants are referred to as aliens. Sending him to a pocket universe, effectively the most private prison ever, also speaks to how much money private companies are making from our current administration's incarceration policies. Add to that the torture, the locking up people without due process, jailing people simply for their opinions, spiriting them away where no one can find them. It's just too much like real life. It flies in the face of every liberal policy and law that is the foundation of America. But when Luthor doesn't care about his pocket universe destroying everything, that is the most real moment. Because modern billionaires don't care who dies or what happens to the planet or if humanity ends. And it's not just about making money or accumulating assets. They seem to enjoy the pain of the masses. There is a deep desire for power and control. Because much like Lex, they are small, petty, jealous men who are trying to compensate for something within themselves. What's scary is how it costs them their own humanity. It's obvious in Superman's end speech that he sees the empty place where Lex's heart and soul should be. But even the engineer, Angela, speaking of how she traded in her humanity to fight Superman, in her case, it seems like fear, but base emotions like jealousy, fear, rage, if we are consumed consumed by them, we lose our souls and become monsters. In hurting others, we hurt ourselves. Luthor's attempts to dig up dirt on Superman, the foreign war he starts, the clone he creates, all these things just so he can kill Superman without consequence out of insane jealousy. It's so close to how billionaires and the wealthy behave towards the progressive movement, the muckraking in elections, the hyperfixations Fox News does where they focus in on tiny details of candidates' lives or platforms and try to blow them up into scandals, the obsession with labeling everything non-rich folk friendly with left-wing slurs like communism, socialism, and Marxism. Now, in Superman's case, Luthor does find something, but in the case of the progressive movement, there isn't much there. I think my favorite was in Zoran's campaign when the New York Post claimed that the reason he lost his high school election was because he offered free juice. He took it seriously and rebutted it on his TikTok in a deadpan, hilarious, but also informative fashion. Or the fact that many people believe AOC is a millionaire despite her very low net worth. Or that Bernie is evil because he has 3 houses. They don't oppose capitalism, but their push for regulation and common decency means that they do. So people who only watch right-wing channels will believe it without evidence. If you really want to know who is problematic, there's a TikTok channel which fully explains which members of Congress are corrupt and which ones aren't. But to watch those videos, you have to believe in complexity and nuance first, which means accepting that possibly your favorite congressperson might be taking corporate funds and have no interest in your well-being, even if they're a Republican. It speaks to the dozens of small scandals and fights that right-wing figures have initiated with supposedly far-left figures, as they call them. Like this video, where Zoran sees the mailers that the opposition sent out about him. He's obviously not putting homeless people in the subway system, and he's not defunding the police. He's just putting money towards social workers and mental health counselors so that cops can focus on crime. But the people who are sponsoring those mailers, DoorDash, Michael Bloomberg, Bill Ackman, they don't care. They could still make good money in the city with a few reforms that he's proposed. But where would they get their jollies from then? Perhaps sadism fills an emotional need in certain people. But it's sad, because if Luthor's speech to Superman at the end of the film is any indication, power isn't everything. By virtue of his existence, Superman makes the most powerful humans on Earth, billionaires, powerless. Humans can never be as powerful as him, no matter what we do, which means that power itself is a fruitless endeavor. If the government splits up powerful companies and taxes millionaires and billionaires an appropriate tax rate for their income, distributing money and effectively power in a more balanced fashion, then pursuing power through wealth is also a meaningless endeavor. The world as we know it right now would disappear and a more balanced, logical world would appear in its place. Power has its limits too, as we see in Luthor's endless envy and in the face of Superman's kindness, goodness, and decency. It comes off gross and pathetic, as it always has been. This isn't something modern. The story of Superman and Luthor has always been this one, that of power and envy, two sides of the same coin, a quintessentially American story. But balanced power, community, truth, justice, Superman will always win. This is the core of the mythos of our nation. Superman reigns supreme as a herald of the re-rising of liberal values. The era of these outsiders ruling humanity is over. The post-World War II era of the US as world police, of kings, the elites, and the post-colonial order where the West ran everything is over. No one wants Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams with their top-down approach to leadership. This is a time where leaders need to be of the people, stand shoulder to shoulder with us, and work with ordinary folks regardless of their position. Superman's origins, the now somewhat sinister nature of his background, makes him one of us, burdened with a complex family history, even with all of his power, and this is what makes him a modern, relevant Superman. Leaders like AOC, Zoran, and Bernie show up in parades, local restaurants, and are accessible to their constituents. Nobody wants Luthor or wealthy elites who run the show from behind the scenes. The irony of this fact is evident in that people elected Trump, who is the poster child for these elites, while claiming that he was different. These are individualistic, singular leaders, and no one wants them anymore. This is why we are talking about the progressive movement, not specific candidate, because the future is all about the collective. Even in the Superman movie, it wasn't just about him. It was about the Justice League. I'm not calling it the Justice Gang. You can fight me in the comments if you want. And the Daily Planet staff, and Ma and Pa Kent. Even in the interview David did, he talked about the importance of the crew and the people who helped him, even saying that after he got the role, he called his high school drama teacher to thank him. The progressive movement is a movement, something something that the media doesn't seem to understand either, questioning leaders in the movement when they refer to their candidacies and work as us or we, not understanding that they are part of a movement, not single candidates running for selfish reasons. Because that is the future. Without Eve's cooperation and the leaked information, without Mr. Terrific's help in closing the fissure, without the Daily Planet team reporting the truth about Luthor's actions, Superman would be doomed. And without the volunteers who vote, donate, canvass, and prop up these candidates, the progressive movement wouldn't make it. The problem is that much like Superman in this film, the progressive movement is deeply maligned and manipulated in the minds of ordinary citizens. It's a sign of the times that public opinion can be shaped and reshaped by media of all varieties. The first time Superman was important in my life was during the Iraq war crisis in the early years after 9/11, and that was also another time when powerful figures manipulated public sentiment to get their way, pushing us to work against our own interests. Superman is about that unwavering feeling that the truth will prevail no matter what. The movie tells the story we all need to hear, though I worry that this choke point in history will be just like Iraq and the horror that it wrought upon America. I think of the videos that later on I saw of Bernie Sanders from that time period, being one of the few voices pushing back against the war and the invasion and the powerful business interests trying to force us into a quagmire. A lone voice of sanity, Bernie has always been speaking out against the festering corruption of business and powerful interests, digging their hooks deeper into our government and public interest. And he was absolutely right. Supply-side economics, or the kind of capitalism we have come to know, started in the 80s with Reagan's policies and has been influential in breaking apart our world. The elite and the wealthy are so powerful now, they can claim that these grassroots, working class, down-to-earth, liberal movements are somehow evil for prioritizing the interests of ordinary folks. Playing the fear that certain groups have of repressive regimes globally, they can make people believe that anyone who is good must be evil because there is no good in the world. So, because the followers of the progressive movement are young, they are morons. And a man like Bernie, who has fought tirelessly for his own community in a basic American liberal fashion, is a hypocrite simply for existing within this system. They've labeled centrist liberalism from the past Marxism, socialism, and communism, knowing they can get away with it because the American public has no real clue about the history or context of those movements. In the same way during the film, Lex consistently manipulates public opinion against Superman. He has his own troll farm, and after he breaks into the Fortress of Solitude and steals the video of Superman's parents, fixes the transmission, and has linguists decipher it, he spreads it even further via the news media. It's a bit extreme if it weren't happening every day now. Any issue is automatic fodder for trolls from around the world and powerful interests to manipulate public opinion. The progressive movement gets the worst of it. Most people who aren't young and following these politicians directly on social media think of these candidates as naive monsters, morons at best and evil at worst, plotting to bring socialism and oppressive big government to Western countries. It would be easy to say that the public is stupid by nature, but the truth is, the pounding steady beat of the drum of propaganda doesn't leave room for any thought. It's the same way that the public mistrusts Superman because of Lex's disinformation campaigns. But many people still support the progressive movement and its candidates. In fact, it's become a global phenomenon if social media is any indication. Because the key in the age of disinformation and manipulation of public opinion is to look at the actions of the group or individual in question. Superman holds a kaiju over his head, gently blowing a dog out of its way and getting stomped on in the process. He tries to do good even if he's not perfect. If you put down your phone and close your TV and look outside and see a superhero fighting a giant monster wrecking your city, then you would be apt to believe the superhero is good. In the same way that if you ignore the mailers, the endless ads and posts on social media, and the never-ending coverage of cable news with its inane questions and ticker tape of nothing burger stories, you can see a political movement or person for what they really are. Progressive candidates canvass local businesses, houses, run phone bank campaigns, and have direct social media channels on all relevant platforms. If you look not just at their websites, but their TikToks, their Instagram pages, their YouTube videos, or even their interviews, you get a real sense of their policies, ideas, and their characters. And you don't need an account on any of these platforms to view what they are doing except for Instagram, but they cross-post, so don't worry about it. So, Peacemaker going on CNN to talk about conspiracy theories, the constant talking heads debating nothing on every cable news network. The level of hearsay that exists in our modern media landscape. It's a miracle if anyone knows anything anymore. Ranting like lunatics and making baseless, irrelevant accusations, these people have filled the world with psychic pollution, so much so that no one else can think anymore. But this is about direct sources and actions. Rumor, gossip, and falsehoods will run rampant all the time, but their methods make character a core issue. And character, integrity, kindness, decency, they aren't just words on motivational posters reminding us to be good people. They are old-fashioned values, but the most appropriate way of living, and we know what that looks like. Or as Pa Kent tells Clark, your choices, your actions, that's what makes you who you are. So, we must engage with the world as it is rather than allowing cable news to give us a shortcut into what to think. Disinformation at its core works because people don't want to have to think. Well, that's tough. As a YouTube channel, I can give you ideas and tell you what I believe based on what I know, but there is no one in the world who should be giving you your opinion of Superman, of the progressive movement, or of anything else in the world. Ultimately, the story of Superman is one of optimism and hope over pessimism and hopelessness. Pessimism, cynicism, these can be useful tools, but when you are consumed by them, it is easy to become hopeless and give in to evil. When you're young, when life is new, you cannot succumb so easily to endless pessimism and nonsense. You have to believe that there is something worth living for. Superman offers a modern portrait of a classic hero, much as the progressive movement offers a modern update to New Deal Democrats. They both love humanity and therefore put process over perfection and authenticity over being polished. I mean, the scene where Superman saves a squirrel was nearly cut because test audiences didn't love it, but it adds so much to his character. It shows how much he loves life. As the last son of a dead race, of course he sees every life as precious. The movie, and now the movement, are peppered with goofiness, silliness, campiness, and joy, because the only response to fascism that gives us the ability to fight is ridicule. I think of World War II and the struggles of that time, and how the 50s became absurdly campy as a result. It is about putting love, care, morality, decency, and classically liberal values of America at the forefront. These young people, whether it be Superman or the handful of progressives in and around our political system, are old-fashioned, charismatic leaders. They offer us nothing but ordinary humanity, and that is beautiful. It means that we, as ordinary humans, are finally represented by our leaders. It's not about origins like gender, race, immigration status. It's about class, if anything. But more than that, it's about the ideas and values our leaders espouse and the actions that they take accordingly. Modern progressivism, much like Superman, is old-fashioned, classically liberal, yet seen as unrealistic, naive, and foolish in these dark times. But they are both filled with goodness, purity, and hope for the future. And while both the new Superman and the progressive movement have a way to go before they are taken seriously by our country, they don't mind. Because when you have values you can believe in, when those ideas are born out of struggle, there is great potential for growth in the future. Superman is a superhero whose life is punctuated with hardship, but he uses it to become a wise, good, and kind person that takes care of others. In making him a powerful person who chooses to be good, rather than the old origin story that lodges him in the now outdated savior complex, we see the fulfillment of the Superman power fantasy, the realization of the idea that power can be innocent. But at the end of the day, neither Superman nor progressive policies will make a better world. People who are kind, decent, and helpful, those who feel responsible for other humans and possess empathy within themselves, will change things. Because it's not about taking the perfect actions or finding the best policy that balances everything. It's about having people in charge who are willing to admit when they are wrong and make changes accordingly. Those who are good, clean, not bogged down by scandal. People who care about other people and the future of humanity. People who are wise and mature enough to be leaders rather than kings. Movements and people that are born out of struggle, whether it's the affordability crisis in America or Superman being the last son of Krypton, have massive potential. We see them choosing to take those struggles and use them as platforms for growth through empathy, responsiveness, and community. No matter what Superman goes through while helping people, getting beaten many times, having his name besmirched, being tortured, he never stops believing in doing good. He never once becomes what he hates. The same way that the progressive movement has been disparaged constantly and made to seem stupid and idealistic, the way that the candidates receive death threats, are subjects of fake scandals, constantly running on Fox News, and are forced to hire private security as a result, nothing stops them from continuing their work. At the end of the day, the giant kaiju destroying the city, the trolls on social media, all of it is just a distraction from the real issues of caring for and protecting ordinary people and human life. No one is interested in the endless stream of nonsense that pollutes our space every day. Our lives and having a functional world are the things that we all care about. And Superman teaches us that if we just stick it out, believe in our values, and have the courage to hold fast to our convictions, there is hope and truth can prevail. In this way, Superman is a progressive, and so are you. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this and made it to the end, please consider subscribing to my tiny channel. I see all of your comments, and I value your input deeply. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!